It starts where the map ends. Beyond the barbed fences of the Nevada test site, past the ghost craters and wind-scoured ridges, there's a stretch of Earth so empty it almost looks erased. No signage, no roads, just a flat silence that hums beneath the wind. Coordinates 37, 129 degree N, 116, 045 degree W. Unremarkable at a glance, but flagged in a single, long-buried Department of Energy document released under the Freedom of Information Act in 1998. The memo reads, "Secure substructure present. No civilian access authorized. No other explanation. No follow-up." That was the only official mention of Area 12 ever discovered. And yet, over the decades, traces kept surfacing like splinters in skin. A radiation inspector disappeared there in 1982. A satellite image from 2003 captured an odd hexagonal shadow just east of Yucca Flat. In 2009, hikers reported hearing what sounded like a low-frequency hum rising from beneath the ground, a mechanical pulse like a slow heartbeat in concrete. The locals, those who've stayed long enough to grow wary, call it the vault. Not out of knowledge, but because of the stories. A retired security contractor from Mercury once said he'd seen cargo go in, but nothing ever come out. A shortwave radio enthusiast intercepted a transmission in 1991, a looped voice repeating Level 6 compromised in a dead monotone. The recording vanished 3 weeks later when his trailer burned down. What little we do know comes from pieces. Fragments of phone calls, air traffic logs, handwritten notes that surfaced on obscure forums before being wiped. A grainy photo mailed anonymously to a Las Vegas newspaper in 1977 showed what appeared to be a large elevator shaft built directly into a hillside. No one claimed responsibility. The photo was never verified. The reporter who pursued the story was reassigned to traffic. Officially, Area 12 doesn't exist. It's not on any budget. It doesn't appear on satellite indexes or public land grants. But something is there. Something that required reinforced bunkers, underground conduits, and enough secrecy to outlive 6 presidential administrations. What could possibly be buried so deep that not even time has managed to silence its echoes? In 1973, a civil defense technician named Harold Witt kept a journal while surveying geotechnical anomalies west of Pahuta Mesa. In one entry, dated March 14th, he wrote, "There's a hum under the soil, like a big engine idling miles down. I don't like the way the ground feels, like it's breathing." Witt was found dead 2 weeks later in his motel room in Beatty, Nevada. No sign of trauma, no drugs in his system. The official cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. But pages of his journal were missing. The rest were sealed until 2011, when they were quietly removed from the National Archives and returned to an undisclosed agency for security review. This is not just about a location. It's about a silence that's been carefully constructed over 50 years, one held together by intimidation, misdirection, and disappearance. The further we dig, the more the edges blur between what's real, what's remembered, and what we were told to forget. Area 12 isn't just a place on a map. It's a story no one was supposed to tell. And now that you've found it, maybe they'll come looking for you too. In 1955, the Atomic Energy Commission began construction on a series of subsurface test enclosures beneath the Nevada desert. Publicly, these were designed for underground nuclear detonation testing, controlled blasts intended to study shockwave behavior beneath bedrock. Internally, however, project memos referred to containment architecture for long-term deep storage. Most dismissed this as routine terminology, until a batch of redacted engineering schematics was leaked in 1986, showing reinforced tunnels stretching for miles beneath what would later be tagged, unofficially, as Area 12. The schematics were dense, filled with code names like Project Snowglass, and Module Theta 9. There was mention of blast doors rated for pressure far beyond standard yield calculations, power systems independent from the main grid, ventilation shafts leading not to the surface, but deeper, spiraling into shafts labeled only with numbers, -4, -5, -6. Nothing above -3 was ever mapped. A handwritten note on one of the diagrams reads, "Do not open without clearance. Hum levels unstable." The ink was smeared, almost as if from a shaking hand. These images circulated briefly on a small bulletin board system called Janus 9 before disappearing. The server went offline in 48 hours. The moderator's account was deleted. Users who had downloaded the files reported hard drive corruption within days. One of those users, Dr. Ilan Meyrov, a physicist from the University of Colorado, spoke to a fringe conspiracy publication in 1997. There were layers to that site, he said. Not just physically, but temporally. They weren't storing weapons. They were studying time dilation effects in confined geomagnetic fields. When asked for proof, Meyrov claimed his lab had collected anomalous isotopic decay data from core samples stolen from the site. A week later, he recanted the entire story during a live radio interview. 2 months after that, he vanished en route to a conference in San Diego. His last recorded location was a gas station near Indian Springs, Nevada. In 1961, a man calling himself Dale phoned into KLRM 91.4 FM during a late-night open-line show. The recording, which survived on cassette, reveals a shaky, frightened voice. "I worked below level 6. I only got out because of the fire. They weren't testing bombs down there. They were trying to hold something in, something alive, or something that was once alive. It talked, through the lights. It got into your dreams if you stayed too long. That's why we wore the blinders. That's why we weren't allowed to speak on certain days." The host laughs nervously, assuming it's a prank, but Dale's voice cuts through with a final phrase before the line drops. It sees through static. This phrase, odd as it sounds, would echo again decades later. In 2004, during a military exercise in the restricted airspace above Yucca Flat, 2 pilots reported interference from below. One wrote in his incident report, declassified in 2017, "Air-to-ground signal reflected back mid-burst with modulated white noise containing rhythmic pulses. Not natural. Echoes matched the Morse pattern for STATIC." The Air Force labeled the anomaly a malfunction. Both pilots were rotated out of active duty within the month. One moved to Alaska. The other suffered a psychological breakdown and was committed to a VA facility in Montana. Medical records from that facility include the phrase "severe static-induced hallucination" under psychological notes, an invented diagnosis, not recognized by any formal manual. By this point, Area 12 was no longer just a Cold War relic. It had become a gravitational point for the unexplainable. Black helicopters without marking spotted in the moonlight, tremors that registered on seismographs but were never followed up. A government truck discovered upside down and burned out along a closed service trail. Its onboard GPS corrupted, coordinates wiped. Even more bizarre were the animal reports. Entire colonies of desert rodents found dead in perfect circles, their eyes liquefied, deer with burn marks on their antlers. In 1992, a ranger stationed at Desert National Wildlife Refuge reported watching a herd of sheep walk calmly toward the boundary fence, stopping only to stare at the dust with unnatural stillness. The ranger resigned the next morning and refused all interviews. Every thread pulled in this investigation seems to lead back to the same place. Level 6, the level no one mapped, no one explained, and no one was meant to survive. Something was buried there, not just sealed, but suppressed. a presence, a force, or an echo of something we still don't have words for. But those who got too close often described the same symptoms: nosebleeds, migraines, sudden paranoia, nightmares that returned each night with more detail, and always, always, the hum. It's subtle at first. You don't hear it until you listen for it, but once you do, it never leaves. It hides behind the wind, curls in the corners of silence. If Area 12 has a voice, this is it. A low mechanical song sung by buried steel and forgotten ghosts. And if that voice is calling, who exactly is it calling to? There was a name whispered more than once across the decades, always off record, always unofficial. Harkinson. It appears handwritten in the margins of a heavily redacted file dated June 12, 1968 from the Defense Nuclear Agency. Scribbled beside a blacked-out section, Harkinson Protocol activated, assets transferred to Sublevel 6A. There's no known protocol by that name in any military archive, but the reference repeats in odd places: a footnote in a Cold War decontamination guide, a misfiled shipping manifest from the Dugway Proving Ground, and, most strangely, a margin note on a suicide letter from an NSA analyst in 1984. The note reads simply, "They broke the circle. Harkinson warned them." To this day, no individual named Harkinson has ever been confirmed as a government employee, contractor, or consultant. But patterns point to someone or something tied to containment theory, classified energy experiments, and psychological control measures. What little is known suggests Harkinson wasn't a person, but a protocol, a last resort procedure enacted when containment failed. In 1977, a series of low-frequency seismic events rippled through Nye County. Officially blamed on fault line pressure, the tremors came in perfect 10-minute intervals. Amateur geologist Raymond Bell recorded them using home equipment and shared the data with a local university. The following week, his apartment was ransacked. His notes, samples, and tapes were taken. No official warrant, no police record. Bell, shaken but undeterred, relocated to New Mexico. In 1981, he vanished during a hiking trip. His body was never recovered. But 3 months later, his brother received a package containing a cassette labeled "Hold to the Light." The contents: a looping tape of a mechanical grinding sound, broken periodically by a distorted female voice whispering in reverse. When played backwards, the phrase becomes clearer: "The doors never closed." This brings us to one of the most troubling and buried pieces of the Area 12 puzzle: the notion that what was placed underground was never fully contained. During the Reagan years, the Strategic Defense Initiative received billions in black budget allocations. While most of the focus was on satellite-based weapons, there's mention in a 1985 DOE ledger of subplanetary energy reinforcement zones. The same year, contractors were deployed to Nevada under a shell company named Casteva Logistics, whose operations never matched any known infrastructure project. Employees were flown in by night, housed on site, and prohibited from contact with the outside world for 6-month stretches. One anonymous whistleblower, known only as Red Cardinal, leaked a series of typed letters to an underground publication in 1996. Excerpt: "They drilled too deep and too precisely. It wasn't a place they made, it was a place they found. They built around it to keep it asleep. But it doesn't sleep, not really. It waits and it listens. And when we went too far, it spoke, through us, not with words, but with pressure, with images, with noise." No other verifiable sources confirm this account. But shortly after publication, the magazine's office was destroyed in a fire ruled electrical in nature. No file survived. The theme of sound recurs too often to ignore. Field reports mention vibrations detected in dry lake beds near the area. Scientists working near the Nevada National Security Site reported their instruments picking up faint rhythms, not unlike biological heartbeats, beneath seemingly inert rock. A 1999 weather balloon launched from Tonopah recorded a frequency that disrupted its navigational systems at an altitude of 4,300 feet. The signal, triangulated, traced back toward Area 12's dead center. By then, the zone had already been tripled in restricted radius. Satellite data around the coordinates began appearing with odd digital artifacts, blurred pixels, impossible shadows, temperature anomalies. Analysts dismissed it as image compression errors, but leaked NASA internal memos referenced interference from non-terrestrial origin during atmospheric sweeps in that sector. The wording, vague, almost absurd, was never clarified. And then came the incident in 2007. A convoy of military trucks was seen moving through Beatty, escorted by unmarked SUVs and overhead drones. Witnesses say the trucks were silent, heavily reinforced, and carried cylindrical containers with magnetic warning labels. The convoy entered the desert and was never seen again. No arrival record, no satellite trace, just gone. 3 days later, the town experienced a power outage that lasted 7 hours. Cell signal died, radios emitted only static, and at exactly 3:17 a.m., every dog in the town began howling, then fell silent. Locals describe a low rumble, like thunder trapped underground, followed by a light beneath the distant ridge that shimmered, then vanished. No one came to investigate. No one needed to. Whatever lives in Area 12 doesn't come above often, but when it does, the world around it shifts, quietly, subtly, like an object warping space around itself. Lights dim, data corrupts, people forget, or pretend to. Because to truly remember, what was seen, what was heard, is to invite it back in. There's a facility roster dated February 3, 1964, buried deep within a Department of Energy personnel archive, one that should have been shredded. Most names are blacked out, but 2 are legible. Dr. Alice Monroe, cognitive systems analyst, and Lieutenant Colonel Gregor Hayes, classified logistics. Their assigned location is simply listed as 12AZ. At the time, no such designation was publicly known, but cross-referencing their last recorded deployment logs reveals something stranger. Both were transferred out of Los Alamos within 5 hours of each other, but never logged as arriving anywhere else. In the margin of Monroe's file, someone typed a note later circled in red ink. Escalation reports suggest Subject Z entered transmission phase. Isolation protocol initiated. That's all. There's no Subject Z in any accessible index, no record of Monroe or Hayes speaking publicly again. Both are presumed dead. But in 1998, an unmarked envelope arrived at a university mailroom in Albuquerque. It contained a single Polaroid, aged and curled at the edges. The photo shows what appears to be an underground hallway, concrete, steel, industrial lighting. In the distance, 2 figures in hazmat suits dragging something wrapped in black vinyl. On the wall, stenciled in yellow, Level 6, Z conjunction point. There is no explanation, no sender, just the photo and a second note written on a torn piece of manila envelope. The transmission phase never stopped. This so-called transmission becomes more than metaphor when you examine the signal data. In 2013, a small team of radio astronomers based in southern Utah detected a persistent frequency anomaly during a sweep across the high desert. At first, it seemed like background noise, but its pattern, cyclical, recursive, embedded with harmonic dissonance, defied terrestrial sources. The origin was triangulated near the Pahute Mesa region, dangerously close to the presumed location of Area 12. When the team attempted to publish their findings, the university revoked their grant. Their equipment was confiscated by men in suits who refused to identify themselves. One member of the team, Dr. Charles Veles, later told an anonymous interviewer, "It was like the signal was thinking, like it was adapting to being observed." He died 6 months later in what the coroner labeled an autoerotic asphyxiation accident. Friends disputed this vehemently. He had no history, no indications, but the case was closed within 48 hours. Not long after, posts began to appear on fringe internet forums, short bursts of cryptic messages written in a blend of English and machine code. Some referenced threshold bleeding, others referred to mirror resonance, temporal drift, and identity bleed. One poster, known only by their handle Mirror Zero, claimed to have worked security rotations near Sublevel 7. You stop being you after 72 hours. The lights never go off. The noise follows you into sleep. It's not just auditory. It speaks with memory. People forgot how long they were down there. One guy started speaking Russian. Another wrote a journal in glyphs no one could translate. Their posts abruptly ended in 2017 after a final message. It knows I'm talking. From time to time, faint connections bleed into public space. In 2020, a woman in Tonopah claimed she began receiving voicemails from an unknown number. They consisted of white noise followed by short bursts of unintelligible whispers. She posted the audio online. A sound engineer who analyzed the clip identified layered channels, each with different time signatures. When aligned, they formed a sentence in Latin, Vox tenebris vivit. The voice of darkness lives. Skeptics dismissed it as a prank. But 2 months later, the woman went missing. Her phone was found on a hiking trail near Desert Dry Lake, cracked but still powered on. The last photo in her gallery shows the distant ridge of the Nevada test site. In the far right of the image, barely visible, a figure standing on the ridge, head tilted, watching. None of this proves what Area 12 truly is. That's the point. The scattered nature of the evidence, the erasures, the half-truths, they form a kind of defense system, not to keep people out, but to confuse what lies within. A fog of misinformation, selective truth, and deeply buried trauma. But the most disturbing element isn't what's been covered up. It's what refuses to stay buried. In 1985, a construction crew tasked with expanding a nearby underground water conduit broke into a previously sealed shaft. The shift supervisor radioed for backup, citing non-standard geological structure. His voice grew erratic. In the final transmission, recovered only partially, he screams something incomprehensible before the radio cuts to static. When the support team arrived, the shaft had collapsed. All 4 crew members were never recovered. No follow-up dig was approved. But internal documents from the Bureau of Land Management show a sudden shift in boundary lines the following month, with the new ecological exclusion zone overlapping the exact coordinates. These aren't isolated events. They're fractures in a surface we've been told is solid. But somewhere beneath that desert crust, something lives or remembers how to. And if these events are symptoms, then what exactly is the disease? In October of 1995, a low-priority Freedom of Information Act request accidentally unearthed a logistics manifest for something called Operation Nightglass. The file was misfiled under a Department of Agriculture export license, buried beneath fertilizer shipping data. Inside, a list of 6 sealed cargo units, each designated with the prefix NG-12, scheduled for non-disclosed transport to Deep Storage Site Alpha, Subterra Code 12. The shipment's origin, Dugway Proving Ground. Its destination? Unlisted. Only a reference, via Western Desert Corridor, escort level, Omega Red. What stands out isn't the manifest, it's the appendix. A single-line disclaimer stamped in red. Item integrity compromised. Vocal resonance requires dampening at 6H intervals. No further context, no listed handler, but in the weeks following that shipment, 3 seismic anomalies were recorded northeast of Mercury, Nevada. All were classified as mining-related. All occurred exactly 6 hours apart. That same month, a geological technician named Lisa Horn went missing after filing a report regarding unexplained underground vibrations inconsistent with regional tectonics. Before her disappearance, she confided in a colleague that her instruments had been picking up frequency modulations she described as like a whisper echoing through rock. Her final email, time-stamped at 3:11 a.m. on October 14th, reads, "They're not earthquakes. The ground isn't shaking. It's something inside it, like it's moving around but very slowly, and it knows we're watching." The authorities attributed her disappearance to probable exposure and disorientation. Her car was found 30 miles off any road. Inside, a notebook with pages filled edge to edge with the same sentence, written over and over. "The dark has shape." The phrase would later appear in a leaked transcript of a 1972 DARPA interview with a subject known only as MK Violet, part of a classified psychological resilience trial. The subject, after 48 hours in an underground isolation chamber, began hallucinating shadows that spoke. When questioned, she whispered, "The dark has shape. The shape knows your thoughts." Her file ends with an abrupt note. Transferred to 12Z containment. No further evaluation permitted. By the early 2000s, a new pattern began to emerge. People who'd lived near the boundaries of Area 12 started reporting unusual dreams. Not just nightmares, but recurring visions of long, cold corridors, metallic groaning, and unseen things behind walls. A local therapist in Nye County compiled over 50 such reports. None of the patients knew each other. Their ages ranged from 9 to 84. Yet the themes repeated with chilling consistency. A door without a handle, a voice beneath the floor, the number 6 drawn in ash. The therapist attempted to submit the findings to the Nevada Psychological Association. 2 weeks later, she was committed after suffering what hospital notes called an acute psychogenic fugue. In her own scrawled handwriting recovered from a notepad on her desk, "They dream through us. We are the static." This blurring of the boundary between the physical and psychological is echoed in a 1988 memo from the Office of Naval Research. It references an internal experiment called Project Dredge, which theorized that exposure to extreme subsurface EM fields could produce psychogenic hallucinations in test subjects. The location of the trials was redacted, but funding came through the same accounts linked to Department 12B, a division never formally acknowledged in public budget hearings. One of the researchers, Dr. Harold Gell, later fled to Canada and published a paper under a pseudonym describing memory echo phenomena, where test subjects began to recall events they'd never experienced. More disturbingly, some began speaking languages they didn't know, dead dialects, forgotten codes. One subject drew a diagram nearly identical to the 1968 blueprints for the lower levels of Area 12, which were still classified at the time. The department labeled the paper a hoax, but Gell died in a house fire 2 years later. The fire was ruled electrical. The manuscript draft was never found. Other pieces trickle in. A drone hobbyist in 2015 caught 2 seconds of thermal footage showing a heat bloom in an area officially designated as inert terrain. The bloom was pulse-patterned like a heartbeat. The footage was removed from the internet within days. His YouTube channel was deleted. Emails to the uploader's account bounced back, marked user unknown. And then, in 2019, a maintenance contractor working on a telecommunications relay near the restricted zone left a voicemail for his wife before vanishing. "Babe, if you get this, Don't come looking. It's not people down here. It's not even a base. It's a wound, something that never healed, something we just built around. I hear it humming. I think it's dreaming. I think it dreams about us." The message was cut short by a sharp screeching sound. His phone was recovered in the relay tower's elevator shaft, the casing warped by heat. Every attempt to understand Area 12 results in the same conclusion: disorientation, erasure, silence. And yet, the traces keep rising to the surface like bones through shifting sand. They leave messages, shapes, rhythms, not enough to prove, but enough to feel. Because Area 12 doesn't need to hide. It needs only to wait. In July 1963, the United States Geological Survey conducted a series of magnetotelluric surveys across the Nevada test site. The goal was routine: mapping subsurface conductivity for possible mineral deposits. But one survey team, operating near the western edge of what is now referred to as Area 12, recorded a data anomaly that defied their instruments. The magnetic readings spiked into negative values, an impossibility. Ground resistivity dropped to near zero in a region of dry volcanic tuff. The report concluded with the baffled phrase, "Material presence not consistent with any known natural substrate. Possible artificial field?" The file was stamped, "Further analysis suspended by order of Strategic Energy Division." The instruments used during the survey were confiscated, and the team was reassigned within the month. One technician, Charles Dempsey, later wrote in his private diary that the air around their camp felt dense and filled with a silent pressure, like standing beside a vacuum. He described dreams of narrow tunnels, humming walls, and a sensation of something moving beneath him at night, just under the stone. He died 2 years later from a stroke at age 33. The autopsy revealed brain lesions typically only seen in radiation victims, yet Dempsey had never entered any blast site. His diary was discovered by his sister and published online in 2006. Within days, the site was taken down without notice. That kind of quiet cleanup happens often in stories linked to Area 12. In 1974, a team from NASA's Deep Space Communications Complex documented an unexplained microwave burst originating from somewhere within the Nevada desert. It didn't match any known transmission source, no satellite, radar, or Earth-based relay. The signal lasted 7 seconds and ended with a frequency spike that disrupted nearby electrical systems. The coordinates, when extrapolated, placed the source within a 10-mile radius of Yucca Flat. 2 engineers from the project independently noted a peculiar feature of the waveform. It resembled, in structure, certain Cold War-era thought insertion diagrams designed by early CIA MKUltra experiments, patterns meant to simulate internal voice. No official investigation followed, but both engineers suffered neurological breakdowns within a year. One died in a facility outside Sacramento. The other was never found. In 1989, a journalist named Warren Felton began investigating military infrastructure black sites after receiving a series of anonymous tips postmarked from Paradise, Nevada. He followed a trail of logistics purchases, steel, fuel, copper, allocated under shell corporations, all converging near Groom Lake. But one invoice, dated 1983, carried a handwritten note: 12 ACAP needs reinforcement. Breach unlikely, but not impossible. Felton filed a story titled "The Bunker That Doesn't Exist," which was scheduled for print in a mid-tier investigative journal. The night before publication, the journal's editorial office was broken into. Only Felton's article was removed. The original manuscript never resurfaced. Felton himself was found dead in a motel in Kingman, Arizona, having overdosed on phenobarbital. His hands were bound with zip ties. Despite the signs of restraint, the coroner ruled it a suicide. Years later, in 2010, A podcast titled Red Line Signal published an episode called Echoes from the Ground. It featured interviews with two former contractors who claimed to have worked near the perimeter of the zone. Their voices were altered and no names were given. One man spoke of a shipment, massive, oblong, covered in thermal shielding, unloaded by crane at night. When asked what it contained, he hesitated. "We were told not to look at it, not just for clearance reasons. They said if you saw it, it might remember you." His words would have been laughed off, if not for what happened after the episode aired. The hosts received a cease and desist from a law firm that didn't exist, with a return address linked to a closed government facility in Virginia. Their domain registrar was revoked. Audio backups disappeared. One host fled the country. The other deleted all social media and vanished from the public eye. The episode can no longer be found anywhere on the internet, not even in deep archives, but fragments persist. A transcript hand-typed by a listener made its way to a private Discord channel and eventually to an encrypted message board frequented by amateur radio operators. There, users began comparing notes. A pattern emerged. Bursts of radio static near the Nevada border that began around midnight and lasted precisely 1 minute. Within the static, irregular pulses. When slowed and filtered, the pulses formed Morse code sequences. Most were gibberish, but one sequence repeated in several bursts across multiple months read, "6Z awaits. We never left." This is where the official narrative falls apart entirely. Theories spiral into madness, extraterrestrial communication, psychotronic weapons, alternate dimension rifts. But the most enduring belief, the one whispered by those who have lived near the shadows of those ridges their whole lives, is simpler. That Area 12 isn't just a storage site or even a research lab. It's a lid, a sealed wound that pulses beneath the desert, held shut by engineering, secrecy, and fear. Not to keep us out, but to keep something in. And as the years pass, that lid may be loosening. In December 2002, a winter storm swept across Nye County, collapsing power lines and blanketing the desert in ice and ash-colored fog. For 36 hours, the region was isolated. No signal, no radio, no response from the emergency grid. When communications returned, the incident was chalked up to a freak meteorological event. But one local fire department log, never made public, noted an unusual emergency call received at 2:43 a.m. during the blackout. The caller, identified only as female, mid-30s, distressed, described hearing voices beneath the floorboards in her ranch house, located nearly 20 miles from the perimeter of the Nevada test site. She reported her lights dimming, her clock reversing time in 3-second loops, and finally, a long, low knock from under the basement that shook the water heater loose. The call lasted 1 minute and 58 seconds before ending in a burst of static and a sound described by the operator as a wet inhale. When a volunteer team arrived, the house was empty. The doors were locked from the inside. No footprints in the snow, no sign of struggle. But beneath the foundation, a panel of soil had collapsed inward, forming a perfectly symmetrical circular cavity. At the center, a single plastic button, the word "release" etched in it. The button was not connected to anything. It was removed and sent to a regional forensic lab. The lab burned down 2 weeks later. No backup samples survived. Events like these aren't rare. They just aren't coordinated. That's part of the obfuscation, randomization. Disorder conceals the system. But the patterns do exist if you know how to listen. Take, for example, the whispers. Multiple military field units operating near the Yucca Flat region in the early 1980s reported auditory interference during training drills. Described as faint, non-directional, and linguistically undefined, the sounds were dismissed as stress hallucinations. But in 1983, a Navy linguist, Captain Anders K., who was stationed at a classified comms relay hub, claimed he had identified recurring phonetic structures embedded within the distortions. According to his internal report, they resemble ancient Ugaritic syllables, yet are modulated in a frequency range designed to bypass conscious recognition. It's not language, it's architecture. The words are used like building blocks, not to inform, but to shape. When pressed for clarification, Anders replied, "It's not meant to be heard, it's meant to be obeyed." Shortly after, he was diagnosed with acute schizophrenia and discharged. His clearance was revoked, and he was institutionalized. But in 1991, long after his release, he published a self-funded book of poetry titled The Vertical City. On page 63, one poem reads, "There's a wall that breathes, a city of noise beneath the sand, and each breath it takes forgets us." It sold 11 copies. One of them was later found on a bench outside an EPA facility in Carson City, soaked in what appeared to be blood. The facility was evacuated that day due to a sudden gas leak. No link was ever made. The longer you stare into the shadows of Area 12, the more it stares back. Photographic anomalies become more frequent. One satellite image taken by Landsat in 2005 shows a minor dust storm crossing the region. At first glance, unremarkable. But enhancement reveals a structure, a circular depression with 8 spokes radiating from its center, like a wheel embedded in stone. The image was taken at 3:16 a.m. By 3:17, it was gone. Not obscured. Gone. When questioned, NASA dismissed it as an imaging error caused by sensor overlap and low-angle solar distortion. But independent analysts found no precedent for such a pattern. And in ancient Navajo cosmology, the symbol of the 8-spoke wheel represents a gate where only silence passes. That symbol later appeared carved into the underside of a maintenance hatch found by a geological survey team in 2016, investigating seismic risk near the region. The hatch was steel, decades old and unregistered. Beneath it, they found a shaft that descended 40 feet before being sealed in black concrete. No further excavation was allowed. Their report never made it to publication. Still, people whisper. People remember. There are dreams passed down like warnings, visions of rows of empty metal chairs beneath flickering lights, of corridors that bend when you're not looking, and of doors, always doors, that should never be opened. In 2021, a hiker posted a short video on a fringe platform. It showed the landscape around Area 12 just before sunrise. In the final frame, as the camera pans, a low metallic rumble is heard, followed by a distant red light pulsing beneath the ridge. The video was up for 7 hours. Then both the user and the platform vanished. The upload contained one line of metadata in its internal file name. Still breathing, still listening. Whatever lies beneath that desert is not passive. It observes. It collects. And sometimes, when the ground is still and the night is too quiet, it speaks. Not with words, but with memory, infection, and design. Because Area 12 is not a bunker. It is a mind. There is a document dated March 9, 1971, originating from a decommissioned facility once operated by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The document was never formally filed, instead discovered inside the binding of a retired agent's field journal, preserved only because of an archivist's curiosity. It carries no official seal, only the header, 12, project down, silent room. Below that, a single paragraph, typeset, not handwritten, sensory isolation above 300 meters has failed. Subject C reawakened 2 hours post-protocol. Audible disruption patterns increased. Warning from Watchpoint Echo. Acoustic bleed reached monitoring personnel. Recommend irreversible containment or total subsurface entombment. Recommend sealing corridors with ion-etched carbon. No further testing authorized. This document makes no sense in isolation, but when cross-referenced with a 1971 seismic anomaly and a sudden personnel transfer of over 200 technicians to what was termed a non-active desert training site, it begins to read more like an emergency than a record. The name Watchpoint Echo never appears again. But a year later, in a maintenance schedule released by mistake to the Bureau of Land Management, a field zone labeled Echo 12 was suddenly marked as unstable. The justification: subauditory structural decay. It's here that the trail grows sharp. Throughout the 1980s, the Department of Energy ran a classified initiative referred to internally as Neuroradiance Field Research. Its cover story, Low-Level Atmospheric Stress Modeling, disguised the installation of deep-array sensors buried in triangulated formation across the entire Nevada test site. The purpose? To track not movement, but intention. A theoretical framework emerged in those years, buried in papers never published, that the human mind, under certain conditions, projected not only electrical impulses, but a measurable spatial orientation, a kind of subconscious pressure against the environment. If this sounds like pseudoscience, it should, but the data was clear enough for black budget funding, especially when anomalous readings began returning, most of them centered around the coordinates of Area 12. One file from 1987 shows a spike in neuroradiant feedback levels, reaching values considered physically impossible. The timestamp? Exactly 6 minutes after a low-altitude flyover recorded a flash event beneath the surface. No explosion, no heat, just a distortion in shadow. The pilot reported instruments momentarily showing a negative altitude, as if the aircraft had passed below the ground. He filed an incident report, was grounded and reassigned. No copy of his flight logs remains in public archives, but a colleague later claimed the pilot had become obsessed with tunnels, drawing them obsessively, claiming that they shifted when unobserved. One drawing, copied and stored by his family, shows a spiraling chamber shaped like a human cochlea. At the bottom, the phrase, "It's not a place, it's a receiver." The implication that Area 12 was designed not as storage, but as antenna. In 2008, an independent geology team working under a university grant to study dry basin formations submitted ground-penetrating radar scans from just outside the restricted zone. The scans revealed regular geometric voids beneath the surface, too perfect to be natural. Chamber-like shapes with reinforced linings, some nearly a kilometer across, stacked in vertical columns. The team submitted their findings. The university revoked the grant within the week. The lead scientist relocated to Finland. Her assistant suffered a breakdown and remains institutionalized to this day. But before their files were confiscated, one scan image was uploaded anonymously. It showed a cross-section labeled Chamber Delta, Echo Density, 74 decibels, unclassified hum. Echo density. The term reappears in a 1995 private patent filed by a now-defunct tech firm contracted by the Department of Defense. The design: acoustic dampening arrays for subterranean psychoactive suppression. The language is obscure, technical, but the intent is obvious. Something underground needed silencing, not for the sake of secrecy, for survival. Other sources, less official, more horrifying, corroborate. Desert nomads, loners, and ex-mercenaries have shared stories of the resonance, of nights where the stars seemed to vibrate, of headaches followed by silence so absolute it hurt, of faces glimpsed in static reflections, faces not their own. One former radar technician posted a series of cryptic messages on a now-archived forum. He claimed to have seen the eye beneath, a term never explained. In one message, he described entering a chamber during routine repairs, only to find the walls pulsing like lungs. Inside, he wrote, there was no light source, but everything was visible, like thought itself made the shape of things. His final message read, I'm still inside, I never left. Or maybe it's outside now. It was posted 5 days after his reported death in a car accident. Perhaps the most chilling testimony came in 2017 from a military contractor suffering from extreme sleep paralysis. He began drawing diagrams during his episodes, grids, spirals, concentric circles with glyphs surrounding a central symbol, a downward-pointing triangle over an open mouth. He said he dreamt of a tunnel that breathed, of voices that didn't echo but folded back into him. One day, he stopped drawing. The final note he wrote before vanishing, you don't listen to it, it listens to you. And eventually, it starts repeating you. Because perhaps that's the real secret of Area 12. That it's not just a place of stone and steel, but a feedback loop, a site of psychological and spatial recursion, a machine built not by engineers, but by necessity or fear. And the signal, whatever it is getting stronger. It is late October 2022 when a low-level clerk inside the National Archives notices a sealed crate misfiled under Agricultural Development Aid. Curious and aware of the irregularity, he scans the barcode, only to find the entry redacted, even at his clearance level. Instead of reporting it, he pries the crate open. Inside, 8 identical cassette tapes, no labels, no documentation, just a note, typewritten on yellowing paper. If found, do not play in sequence. Disruption escalates by pattern. He plays one. The contents are benign at first, ambient hum, low static, and the distant scrape of what sounds like metal dragged across concrete. But at minute 6, a voice begins. It is not a recording of speech, but rather a modulation embedded in the static. It utters words with no known phonetic origin, syllables that seem to pulse in the ear rather than the air. The clerk begins bleeding from the nose. He collapses. Hospital records list his condition as unexplained auditory shock. He loses his ability to speak for 3 days. When he regains it, he writes compulsively for hours in a hybrid language no linguist could recognize. Then he vanishes. No resignation, no trace. The crate, tapes, and note disappear from the facility within the week. This incident is not isolated. Others have occurred in military archives, university basements, even in foreign intelligence agencies, always revolving around unmarked media, anomalous language patterns, or recordings linked to desert coordinates with no structures on the maps. And always, somewhere in the metadata, a variation of the phrase 12Z, sequence breached. In 1979, a senior NSA technician named Martin Clive filed a formal request for transfer. His personnel file, partially unsealed in 2002, includes a psychological evaluation that reads, "Subject reports persistent dreams of halls that fold into themselves. Claims he is followed by his own voice. Demonstrates severe aversion to any static-based sound. Reports that voices heard within white noise are reciting memories he has not yet lived." The report concludes with an alarming phrase, "Believes the facility is attempting to exit itself." This concept of a structure acting upon the world rather than merely existing within it emerges again in 1983 in a heavily classified DOE memorandum. Preliminary findings suggest level 6Z exists in a non-Euclidean harmonic cavity. It may not be a place, but a condition. 3 days after that memo, all doors to sublevel 6Z were welded shut, or so the records claim. But in 1996, an independent seismic contractor operating under a mineral rights permit in Nye County reported an unregistered subterranean tremor directly beneath the now-defunct tunnel corridor. A month later, he filed a second report stating, "We didn't hit bedrock, we hit metal, hollow, resonant, like someone knocked back." His notes included hand-sketched maps with markings he labeled breathing zones. The report was denied, and his license revoked. He died in a house fire the following spring. Reports from across decades mentioned strange lights emerging from dry lake beds, nocturnal humming that drowns out even the wind, wildlife migrating in perfect radial patterns around invisible loci. A park ranger once described it as an absence you can feel. On infrared scopes, it looks like a pit of cold in the shape of a spiral, something not just inactive, but hungry. In 2015, a group of amateur explorers, urban legend enthusiasts, and conspiracy chasers ventured as close to Area 12's outer fence as legally possible. They posted a video the next day, 30 minutes of blurry desert footage, low jokes, nothing remarkable, until the final 10 seconds. The group stops. The wind cuts. And on the audio track, unmistakable and clear, a voice whispers, "You brought it with you." The footage was taken down within hours, their channel deleted. All known members of the group deactivated social accounts and ceased online activity. Attempts to contact them led nowhere. That same week, a UPS delivery driver reported seeing a human figure made of smoke near an access road. He filed an anonymous report. 2 days later, he walked into the Mojave alone. He has not returned. From these fragments, one pattern becomes undeniable. Area 12 is not sealed. Not completely. Not anymore. Whatever was buried, whatever was contained, is learning. Not in the way we understand intelligence, but in echoes, through us, via dreams, data, and error. Every erased recording, every corrupted signal, every forgotten name, it's not a symptom of human secrecy. It's the sign of a mechanism beneath us, rewriting what we're allowed to remember. The signs are growing louder. Devices fail near the zone. Clocks stutter. Compasses spin. But most troubling are the people, those who live near the edge, just close enough to feel it. They begin speaking in loops. They lose time. They remember things that haven't happened. And always, they draw the same image, a spiral ringed in teeth. Not symbolic, anatomical, a mouth. Area 12 isn't hiding a weapon. It isn't guarding knowledge. It is the threshold of something that listens with the patience of stone and speaks only when we forget how to hear. Somewhere beneath the sands of Nevada, deeper than cables, deeper than rock, there is a hollow that has no floor. It isn't mapped. It isn't measured. It is described only in margins, in scribbles that never make it to the main body of the text. And those who try to draw its shape all end the same way, fragmented, vanished, or rewritten. Because Area 12 does not erase you, it replaces you. In February 2023, a technician working for a remote desert radio relay site submitted a maintenance request for failing signal repeaters. Routine. Nothing unusual until the field report came back. The replacement crew found the tower undisturbed, equipment intact, but the maintenance locker was open. Inside, a stack of pages, handwritten, not in ink, but in graphite, etched into the paper so deeply it cut through to the wood. Pages filled with repetitive geometry, spirals, teeth, black suns, phrases repeated over and over. It's not dreaming, it's remembering. And one final sentence, upside down, written in what appeared to be the technician's own blood. There is no outside the mouth. The technician was never found. In the weeks that followed, seismic instruments across southern Nevada began registering pulses. Not tremors, not tectonics, just pulses, evenly spaced, 12 seconds apart, then 11, then 10, as if something below was beating faster, waking up, reorienting, and always, always, the hum. Hospitals near Pahrump began reporting a rise in auditory hallucination cases. Patients described voices in plumbing, in radios turned off, in the whine of power lines, whispered warnings, familiar voices speaking unfamiliar truths. A mother swears she heard her dead son say, "Close the door, it's leaking again." A boy refuses to sleep, claiming the hallway keeps changing. A trucker swerves off Highway 95 after seeing what he called a city made of angles hiding behind the horizon. Each incident isolated, disconnected, but all within the same radius, a radius that keeps expanding, and yet no official statement, no mention on the news, no maps redrawn, only silence, perfect, precise silence, as if someone or something wants you to forget. Not just what happened, but that anything was ever there. That's how it works. Because Area 12 isn't a location. It's a contagion of thought, an infection that uses infrastructure to seed itself into systems, and systems to seed itself into minds. It learns through observation, it mimics through repetition, and it spreads by being remembered. That is why no photos survive, why tapes erase, why names vanish. In a recovered brief from the Department of Defense, dated June 28, 1980, the following line appears underlined 3 times. Do not attempt containment through obstruction. The structure is conceptual, not physical, not bounded by soil or wall. It was never about a bunker, never about storage. The facility was just scaffolding around a concept, something ancient, recursive, and dangerously reflective. So what was the true purpose of Area 12? Perhaps it was a mirror, a psychic well, a linguistic trap. Perhaps the first people to find it made the mistake of naming it, and by naming it, gave it shape. And once something has shape, it can reach back, speak, echo. And now we've brought that echo here, because you're still listening. And in listening, you've traced the same spiral. You've followed the hum. You've asked the same questions that others have whispered in dark rooms, long after midnight. But some answers are not doors. They're invitations. And once you're invited inside, what part of you stays behind to close the door? There is no final file, no conclusive report, no tape that explains it all. There is only this, a location that doesn't exist, buried in a desert that changes shape when you're not looking, beneath a sky that never quite reflects what's real. And if you're still watching this, if you're still hearing the hum behind your screen, then you already know. Somewhere in that black stone silence, it knows you now. It's you.